Primary balance. The term primary balance is a major source of confusion in the discussion of engine balance. See the below secondary, non-sinusoidal, balance section for the underlying meaning and how this terminology came into popular use. Primary, first order or first harmonic balance is supposed to indicate the balancing of items that could shake an engine once in every rotation of the crankshaft, that is having the frequency equal to one crank rotation. Secondary or second order balance should refer to those items with the frequency of twice in one crank rotation, so there could be tertiary, third order, quaternary, fourth order, quinary, fifth order, etc. balances as well. The term harmonic comes from simple harmonic motion, and is equivalent to the sinusoidal concept described in the section below. Thus secondary harmonic meant to describe the non-sinusoidal vibration caused by secondary imbalance is incorrect. A cylinder in 4-cycle engines fires once in 2 crank rotations, generating forces with the frequency of a half the crankshaft speed. So the concept of half-order vibrations is sometimes used when the discussion is on the balances on torque generation and compression. However, it is somewhat customary to discuss only 2 categories, primary and secondary, in the discussion of engine balance, in which primary is often meant to be all non-secondary imbalance items lumped together regardless of frequency, and secondary is meant to be the effects of non-sinusoidal component of piston and Conrod motions in slider crank mechanism as described below. Secondary, non-sinusoidal, balance. When a crank moves 90 degrees from the top dead center, TDC, in a single-cylinder engine positioned upright, the big end up-down position is exactly at the halfway point in the stroke, but the Conrod is at the most tilted position at this time, and this tilt angle makes the small end position to be lower than the halfway point in its stroke. Because the small end position is lower than the halfway point of the stroke at 90 degrees and at 270 degrees after TDC, the piston moves less distance when the crank rotates from 90 degrees to 270 degrees after TDC than during the crank rotation from 90 degrees before TDC to 90 degrees after TDC. In other words, a piston must travel a longer distance in its reciprocal movement on the top half of the crank rotation than on the bottom half. Assuming the crank rotational speed to be constant, this means the reciprocating movement of a piston is faster on the top half than on the bottom half of the crank rotation. Consequently, the inertia force created by the mass of a piston, in its acceleration and deceleration, is stronger in the top half of crank rotation than on the bottom half. So, an ordinary inline 4-cylinder engine with 180 degrees up-down-down-up crank throws may look like cancelling the upward inertia created by the number 1 number 4 piston pair with the downward inertia of the number 2 number 3 pair and vice versa, but in fact the upward inertia is always stronger, and the vibration caused by this imbalance is traditionally called the secondary vibration. When a Conrod big end rotates, its up-down movement, as seen from the side of an inline 4-cylinder engine, can be plotted on a graph, with the position on the stroke on y-axis, rotational position of the crank in degrees on x-axis, with a clean sine curve, and so this is called the sinusoidal movement. Its left-right changes in position is exactly the same, as it is equivalent to just changing the viewpoint from the side to the top of the engine. However, the up-down position of a Conrod small end, and the piston, does not move in this fashion, as described above, thus is considered not sinusoidal. This non-sinusoidal motion can mathematically be considered as a combination of 2 hypothetical sinusoidal motions, one with the frequency equal to the crank rotation, equivalent to the piston motion with infinitely long Conrod, which is called the primary component, another with double the frequency, equivalent to the effective Conrod tilting angle that lowers the small end position from when it is upright, which is the secondary component. Although pistons do not move in the fashion defined by either of these 2 components, it is easy to analyze the motion as a combination of the 2. As this method of considering the piston motion in 2 components became widely accepted in the field of mathematical analysis, the use of the terms primary and secondary became popular outside of academia without a full grasp on the terminologies and the underlying theory. The vibration caused by this inertia force, or the difference of its strength between the top and bottom half of crank rotation, is small at lower engine speed, but it grows with the increase in crank rotational speed squared, making it a major problem in high-revving engines. Inline 4, inline 6 and 90 degrees V8 engines with flat plane crankshaft move two pistons always in sync, making the imbalance twice as large, and a half as frequent, as in other configurations that move all pistons in different, evenly spaced, reciprocal phases. For example, cross-plane inline 4 and cross-plane V8. Non-sinusoidal imbalance can almost never be completely balanced, with a single crankshaft multi-cylinder configuration without balancer shafts. Boxer engines with many cylinders show the least effect by cancelling all but their plane imbalance in the cancelling forces. In designing a balancer for this purpose, it is common to create a sinusoidal force mirroring the hypothetical secondary component with two counter-rotating eccentric weights that rotate at twice the crankshaft speed, as the use of a counter-moving slider crank as the balancer is less efficient. Inherent balance. When comparing piston engines with different configurations in the number of cylinders, the V-angle, etc., the term inherent balance is used. This term often describes just two categories in the above list that are inherent in the configuration, namely, 3. Phase balance on reciprocating mass, and 13. Phase balance on torque generation. In rare cases when considering a boxer twin, the categories 4. Plane balance on reciprocating mass, 6. Plane balance on rotating mass and sometimes 14. Plane balance on torque generation are included, yet statements like a flat 8 boxer engine has a perfect inherent balance ignore these three categories, as well as 16. Plane imbalance on compression, as flat 8 boxer configuration has inherent imbalance in these four categories by having the left and right banks staggered front to back, not positioned symmetrically in plan view, in the same manner as in boxer twin. Inherent mechanical balance further complicates the discussion in the use of the word mechanical by implying to exclude balances on torque generation and compression for some people, as in the above categorization, while not excluding them for others, as they are the results of mechanical interaction among piston, conrod and crankshaft. While many items on the above category list are not inherent to a configuration of a multi-cylinder engine, it is safe for a meaningful discussion of inherent balance on multi-cylinder engine configurations to include at least the balances on reciprocating mass, 3. Phase and 4. Plane. Rotating mass, 6. Plane. Torque generation, 13. Phase and 14. Plane, and compression, 15. Phase and 16. Plane.